Tim Autrey, and welcome to this resource video for the 7 Natural Principles of Human Performance. If you already have a copy of the book, 7 Natural Principles of Human Performance, great! If not, you can grab a hard copy, Kindle version, or audio version on Amazon. You can also find more information about the book at 7naturalprinciples.com. That's 7naturalprinciples.com. This video is an excerpt from the PPI Human Performance Leadership Masterclass, which is part of PPI Lab. You can access the full course as well as a ton of resources to help you improve safety, reliability, efficiency, productivity, and profitability by joining PPI Lab. More information is available at ppiweb.io/PPI Lab. That's ppiweb.io/PPI Lab. Thanks for being here. Let's get to it. Okay, so we're back over here at the whiteboard now, and we're going to continue our understanding of the individual performance model, and we're going to talk about this part of it right here. So let's go ahead and fill some of this in. So for this line right here, I want you to write in mindset. And this one down here is perception. Let's talk about these right now, and I believe around the top of this is already filled in for you the word personality. Okay, so here's the thing you got to understand. Everything that comes in from the outside world has to pass through here. Now remember, this part of the model up to here is going on inside of you over and over and over and over and over. Stimulus, information, all the stuff from the outside world has to get in here for you to process it, for you to actually make a choice to take an action and behavior and all of that. So the thing is, anything from the outside world has to pass through these two things before it ever even generates a conscious thought. And it kind of gets a little gray there because some of this could be in the conscious realm, some's in the subconscious realm. We don't need to get that detailed with it. Just remember this. Everything from the outside world must come through these two things before it gets inside your model. Mindset and perception. Now, mindset is our mental amplifier. So it's your general overall attitude or your general overall attitude about something. So let's say, for example, you have a really negative mindset about your job. Every day from the moment you walk in the door, if your mindset's negative, anything that's negative is going to be amplified. You're actually going to be looking for negative stuff. That's your mental amplifier. A good way to think of this one, have you ever had a day when you wake up and you are just in a bad frickin' mood? I mean, it's like you're just, you don't know why, but you're just feeling horrible. You ever had that happen? I know I sure have had days like that. At least they start that way before I change my mindset. So, have you ever had a day like that and you stay in that mindset and you get up and you go to work and you stay at work and you come home and everything that could possibly go wrong goes wrong, everything that could possibly piss you off pisses you off, and you are like, the whole universe is conspiring against you? Well, I got to tell you something. The universe couldn't care less. You're creating this because your mindset, if it's negative, is going to tend to amplify anything that it can possibly find that's negative. It's going to look for stuff that's negative, and you're going to find whatever it is you're looking for. So that's your mental amplifier. Perception, on the other hand, is your mental filter. So perception gets a little more specific about specific things. The thing that's important to understand about perception is my perception of reality is my reality. Your perception of reality is your reality. And if my perception of reality is different than your perception of reality, I'm obviously right and you're obviously wrong. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Let's say that you work in a company that has never before given any kind of a bonus. You know, the company's performed well, whatever, and they don't, you don't get a bonus, you don't get any share of the profits, you don't get any of that. And there are a lot of companies like that. Well, let's say you've been working for a company like that and there's never been talk of bonuses, there's never been promise, it's not in your contract, it's not in anything. And the company has a really good year. And they recognize that the folks on the team are the ones that are responsible for making this happen. So After all the accounting is finished in January of the following year, first week in February, you get called into a meeting and you're in there with your team, and your supervisor or department head or whatever hands out these envelopes. And you open up your envelope, and in there is a check made out to you for 10% of your entire previous year's salary. Let me ask you, is your perception of that going to be positive or negative? I could just about guarantee you it's going to be over the moon positive. It wasn't expected. It wasn't anticipated. Son of a gun, 10% of last year's salary, I can go buy that bass boat or whatever, guys, whatever your wife decides you're allowed to do with that paycheck. And of course, I'm kidding. But your perception would be very positive. Now, let's play this scenario out a little bit more. Year number 2. Company has another good year. February comes around. Meeting gets called, you go sit down, they pass out the envelopes, you got kind of an idea of what's in there, you open it up, check for 10% of your previous year's salary. Positive or negative? Positive, right? Is it as positive as it was the first year? For most people, probably not. So, year number 3, same thing. Great year, go into the meeting, sit down, envelopes get passed out, open the envelope, check, 10%, positive or negative? Probably still, I mean, it's not negative, probably still, okay, but it's like, all right, well, now this has become routine. This has become an expectation. So now we get into year 4. And remember, this was never part of your original employment agreement. It's not part of your job contract. It's not anything. Year number 4, the company doesn't have quite such a good year. And so you get called into the meeting, and first week in February, you're all, everybody's smiling and everything, and they pass out the envelopes, and you open up the envelope, and the check is only for 5% of your previous year's salary. Positive or negative? In that simple little example right there, many, many people will say that's negative. Why? Because you've created an expectation. Your expectation has caused your perceptions to shift. So that check that for 10% in year 1 was like over the moon fantastic. Now, in year 4, when it's only 5%, they're screwing us. This darn company. And this is reality. This is the way the human mind works, unless you and I do something to counter that. Now, we're not all exactly the same. Some people would still say, well, 5%, they don't owe me anything, it's still positive. Most people, however, initially anyway, will feel that that's a negative. So, mindset's our mental amplifier, perception is our mental filter. And once again, before I go down here, I want to remind you that my perception of reality is my reality. Your perception of reality is your reality. And this is where we tend to screw it up as influencers. Because if I want to influence this person, and their perception of reality is different than my perception of reality, and I come at it from the perspective that I'm right and they're wrong. Now think about some of the conversations, if you have teenagers at home, you've likely had with them. You are immediately going to initiate what's called a power struggle. And as soon as we get into power struggle space, what part of the brain do you think is going to kick in? We just got done talking about it, the lizard brain. The lizard brain is going to perceive this as a threat. Boom, you got 0 chance of influence. Remember that. We'll cover that again when I go back to the PowerPoint slides as a quick review. Before we do that, though, let's talk about these arrows down here. So this gray area on your diagram, the dashed area that I've put here on the whiteboard, is your personality. And over time, or your personality today, is exemplified by your mindset and perception. Okay? Over time, your personality has been predominantly created by 3 influences down here. The first one is role modeling, and you want to be sure and fill these in. Role modeling. The second one is verbal conditioning. And the third one is specific events. Role modeling, verbal conditioning, specific events. All right, so let's talk about each one of these real quickly. Role modeling. By the time you and I are about 6 years old, 6 to 7 years old, our predominant worldview has been formed. And it has been formed based upon the experiences we've had between the ages of 6 and 7. And a huge percentage of those experiences are based upon who our role models were during that period. And for children that are raised by their parents, who are the predominant role models? Mom and dad. Now, if they're raised by one parent or the other parent, it's that particular parent. If you're raised by grandparents or whatever, whoever your predominant influencers are, from the age of 0 to about the age of 6 or 7, is your predominant role model, has a huge impact on your predominant worldview. This is one of the reasons why so many people get stuck in that victim cycle we're going to talk about in Module 4, and they're blaming their parents for everything. Well, get over it. As I would often say in live venues, I'd say, suck it up, princess. You know, we are where we are. You can't keep blaming your parents for all your problems. But this is one of the reasons we tend to. So whoever our primary role models are, then when we get into school, maybe it's a teacher, and oftentimes we may have a friend that has a lot of influence on us, or maybe it's an older friend or a sister or a brother or a cousin, or then we get into maybe it's a rock star or an athlete or somebody that has taken a big role in our lives and becomes a role model for us. Big influence on our worldview. Verbal conditioning. Some people are unfortunately, again, age of 6 to 7 is key here. Some people, unfortunately, grew up in conditions where they were told horrible things like, you're fat, you're stupid, you're ugly, who the heck do you think you are? You're never going to drive a car like that, you're never going to live in a house like that, just shut up, you're meant to be seen and not heard, and a lot worse things. So if you grew up being told things like that, and you're watching this video, I want to congratulate you, because chances are darn good you've done a fantastic job of overcoming that. The prisons are chock full of people who have grown up being told garbage like that. Some of us, on the other hand, were very blessed and very fortunate. You know, I grew up in a family being told stuff like, look, you can have anything in life you want. You can go anywhere you want. You can do anything you want. All you got to be willing to do is do what it takes to get there, and don't harm or take advantage of anybody else in the process. That's the kind of stuff I was told while I was growing up, and I will thank my parents forever. Verbal conditioning, very important. And then the third element over here, specific events. All of us have had events occur. Some of them are legitimately substantial. Some of them were just substantial to us. For example, depending upon your age, you likely know exactly where you were, and you can still feel the emotion when you heard that the planes had flown into the Twin Towers in New York City on 9/11. That was a global event. And it was, I can tell you, I can go right exactly back to where I was. I know where I was sitting. I know what my next couple of responses were. And then I remember several events from that day, and then, of course, the aftermath of all of that. But that event, when it triggered, became a very, very substantial emotional trigger for many, many, many people. Now, we have other things that have happened to us which were significant for us that nobody else might have even noticed. Again, I'll share a little bit about my background with you to illustrate this. And I think this is of value because I think most people have some things like this in their past, and maybe you never even really recognize it, and maybe this will help you. So when I was in 6th grade, I was, on the top of the social ladder. I was in student council, straight A student on every sports team, the best looking girl in school. Nancy Kelly was my girlfriend. And I had it going on. And I think, in retrospect, I was probably a little full of myself. Well, in the 6th grade back then, that was a time at that age when boys and girls started having combined birthday parties. Prior to that, boys had their parties, girls had their parties. So we started having boy-girl parties, and they'd play some records, and there'd be maybe a little dancing if you were brave enough. Mostly just hanging out, though. And so I was at Sylvia Scadell's birthday party, and apparently Nancy and a couple of her friends decided they needed to put Tim Autrey in his place and knock him down a couple of notches. And so what they did was they overpowered me and threw me down on the couch. Now, I don't know where your mind goes with that, but there was nothing else to it. They just threw me down on the couch. Well, I was embarrassed. And guess what I didn't do? I didn't stay in the gap and think about it and respond. Man, I blasted through that gap because I was so embarrassed that girls could overpower a boy, and I said some things and acted like a stupid idiot. I left Sylvia's birthday party, which was in our neighborhood. I walked home. I never went to another one of those birthday parties. Now, this was in the 6th grade. All throughout junior high school and on into the first part of high school, I didn't go to any parties. I didn't go to any social events. I wasn't on any sports teams. I completely kind of withdrew socially. And like I said earlier, I am an introvert, so it was easy for me to do that. But at the same time, my entire social worldview transformed in that simple little instance of somebody doing something. The whole thing probably lasted 15 seconds, and it had a tremendous impact on my entire life. At least until I processed it and realized what was going on, it had a huge impact on me. So it's possible you've had some specific events like that, and maybe if you think through it now, some things about you might make a little more sense. So again, down here we have role modeling, verbal conditioning, hugely important, especially up to about the age of 7. By then, our predominant worldview is formed. Remember that term because we're going to talk about that in Module 4. And then over the course of our lives, we've had specific events. So all of these have conspired to make us us, and that has determined what we're referring to as our personality. Now, one of the other things that comes into play here is as we have our thoughts and we go through this process and we make our choices and we do the things we do in the way which we do them and they interact with the outside world, there's a feedback loop that comes over here. And you notice on your diagram in your handout there's a big block there and it looks like that. What you want to fill in there is experiences. Our brains are wired to learn from experience. When we talked about how our brains are wired to make mistakes, because we make mistakes, we learn, we adjust. We make another mistake, we learn, we adjust. Well, over the course of our life, we have all these experiences happen, and these experiences over time are what influence our mindset and our perception. And remember, everything from the outside world has to pass through these before it even generates thoughts. These guys are incredibly important. So let's go over to the PowerPoint slide now, do a quick review, and we'll cap this part off. Okay, so this block down here we have labeled as personality, and we talked about role modeling, verbal conditioning, and specific events. And inside of this, we have mindset and perception. Now, remember what I told you about mindset. If you're in a generally negative mood, your brain is going to amplify, it's the mental amplifier, anything negative you can find, and it's going to be looking for negative stuff. And whatever you're looking for, you're generally going to find. That brings us to key insight number 14. What I focus upon expands. This is hugely important, and we'll be coming back to this when we talk in Module 7 about aligning behaviors out in the field. You go out there for looking what people are doing wrong, guess what you're going to find more of? What people are doing wrong. And in the grander scheme of things, that doesn't serve anything. Again, I'm jumping way ahead. We'll talk more about that when we get there. So go ahead and fill this in. Now on page 2, what I focus upon expands. Okay, so that's our amplifier. Perception is our mental filter. And as I mentioned earlier, perceptions are different. So here's a fun little exercise that you can do, and you can do it right now. Watch me do it, and then pause this and do it yourself. It'll kind of blow your mind. So what I want you to do is I want you to hold your finger above your head, and I want you to rotate it in a clockwise direction. Clockwise direction. Okay, now while you're continuing to rotate your finger in a clockwise direction, bring it down here and look at it from above. What direction is it rotating? Very interesting, isn't it? Clockwise direction. You bring it down here and it's going counterclockwise. Same rotation, same finger, different perception. That's how easy it is. So if you want to prove that to yourself, go ahead and pause this right now. And when you're done, come back, okay? All right, so if you paused it, welcome back. We're going to show you a video now because here's what it comes down to. My perception of reality is my reality. Your perception of reality is your reality. And because that's the case, I will go to great lengths to prove to you that my perception of reality is in fact correct. So we've got a fun little video here for you to watch. The scientists, the mathematicians, the physicists, and the engineers really love this one, so check it out.
I figure 75% to you, Pon Ma, and 25% divided between the 5 of us. Yida, Crowbar, myself, Tom, and the baby. That makes 5% for each one of us.
Billy, you're cheating yourself. If there's 25% divided among the 5 of you, that's 14% apiece.
Oh, no, listen, Pa. I wouldn't cheat you. You know I wouldn't. Now, look here. I'll show you. Let me rub this out here. And now, 25 divided by 5 is 5. You see, 5 won't go into 2, will it? No. But 5 goes into 25 5 times, you see?
No, you're wrong, Billy. Now, I'm a pretty good mathematician. Now, 5 into 25... 5 won't go into 2, will it?
No.
But 5 goes into 5 once. Now, we didn't use the 2 before, so we bring it down here. Now, 5 into 20 goes 4 times. There you are. 5 into 25, 14.
No, look, Pa. Let me prove it to you now by multiplication. 5 times 5. 5 times 5 is 25.
Really, I'm surprised you're learning.
Huh?
I'm surprised that you're learning. Now I'll show you. 5 times 14 is 25. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 1 is 5. 25. That's it.
No, look, Ma. See, look, you're wrong there because I'll prove it to you. We'll put down 5 14s here. 14. There. Now I'll prove to you by addition that 5 14s is not 25. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20.
21, 22, 23, 24, 25. There you are. Better brush up, Billy. I don't want to see you boys cheated.
So, what do you think about that? Here's what I want you to take away from this video. You know, in industrial sectors, in a lot of sectors, we have discovered that there are lots of engineers, and in reality, in a lot of sectors, you either are an engineer or you're forced to work with engineers, right? And of course, I'm saying that in jest. That's just funny. And we've discovered over the years, engineers like to laugh at themselves. So, and we work with lots of engineers. The thing is, I want you to remember this. The next time an engineer is attempting to use a calculation to prove to you something is right, and your gut's just telling you, you know, that doesn't seem right to me, I want you to remember this video. All right, let's move on. All right, so all of this conspires to create your personality, and as we talked about before, my perception of reality is my reality, your perception of reality is your reality, and here's where we want to be really careful as influencers, because if I come at this from the perspective of I'm right and you're wrong, we immediately have a power struggle, the lizard brain kicks in, and we have no chance of influence. This brings us to the next key insight number 15, a really important one to remember, especially in today's world. 4 generations in the workforce, which we're going to talk about in Module 4, lots of different ethnicities working together in this global environment. Crazy, right? So here's what you need to remember. Different isn't wrong, it's just different. And depending on the way you were brought up and things, this might be a tough one for you. However, let's go all the way back to one of the first things we talked about, expanding your context. The first thing you need to do is take the lid off your container and be open, and then make active effort to recognize you don't know everything. Your perception about everything is not necessarily the way it is. Your opinion is not necessarily the absolute truth, and it's probably not. And the more you begin to recognize this, the bigger, better, happier life you're going to be able to have. And remember, as I said before, as far as I'm concerned, the beginning of wisdom is recognizing what you don't know. Hand in hand with this is recognizing that just because something is different or someone is different, it doesn't make it wrong. They're just different. All right then. So, back to this model now. As we talked before, all of these experiences with the outside world or these interactions generate your results. Those results feed back to generate experiences. These experiences over time will impact your mindset and perception, will impact your personality, and we cap off with the final key insight number 16, which is my personality creates my personal reality. So now, time for a little introspection. If your personal reality right today is not exactly as you want it to be, perhaps you ought to begin to recognize that your personality's got something to do with it. Your current mindset, your current perceptions, open-minded, closed-minded, I'm right, you're wrong, whatever it happens to be. If you really want to have a bigger, better life, it's time to open that stuff up. And it's time for each and every one of us always to continually recognize this. And honestly, this can be one of the hardest habits to break, the habit of being yourself. And I want to recommend a fantastic book about this. It's a book written by a friend of mine, Dr. Joe Dispenza, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. I couldn't recommend a better book about this particular topic right here. Dr. Joe he's a chiropractor, he's a doctor, but he's also a scientist and a researcher, a neuroscientist, and he's done tremendous number of experiments over the past several years, and has come to a lot of discoveries about what's going on in our minds and all of that. So anyway, highly recommend this book if you're interested in exploring this further. All right, that is it for Episode 8. In Episode 9, we're going to continue developing how to use the individual performance model. We're going to talk about something called primary performance needs. So see you in Episode 9.